Hello, podcast listeners. Have you seen Deadpool and Wolverine? If not, stop listening to this right now. Go to the theater, get your popcorn, get your pop, enjoy the movie, and then listen. This is very spoiler heavy. This thing is like, oh, hey, listen, I got a pork chop. I'm going to put it in the backseat of my car. Uh-oh, I was kidnapped by international terrorists, and now it's a month later, and I'm finally getting my car out of impound. What has happened to that pork chop? That is the level of spoil in this episode of JJ Meets World. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called J.J. Meets World.
Just so you know that there will be spoilers in this.
Heavy spoilers.
Like mayonnaise outside on a 90-degree day. This is going to spoil, baby.
Like
spoil.
Isn't there? I wanted to make a car reference, but I can't connect what a spoiler actually does in a car.
Like if you have a hand-me-down Prius that you want to make look like cool, you are going to spoil that back end. Big time.
Yeah, because listen, this is a movie. I shouldn't say this is a movie I've been waiting for 30 plus years, but seeing the big W on the screen in a comic accurate-ish costume, that's something I've waited for since I saw X-Men on Fox in 92.
So we're talking about Deadpool and Wolverine, which originally was titled Deadpool and Friend. And then the trailer leaked to the internet days before the Super Bowl, which is where the debut trailer was going to be. And the internet exploded. And so they changed the title from Deadpool and Friend to Deadpool and Wolverine, which I thought was interesting to say the least. So if you haven't seen the other Deadpool movies, this is weird, but like you have to have seen those, I think, to enjoy this movie.
Yeah, and in fact, you have to have seen a lot. You have to.
There's a slew of stuff you need to have seen,
and some notable things missing as well. We'll get into.
I also feel like you need to have gone to the message boards of like Ain't It Cool News in 2006 to understand everything that you're getting into. So the original Deadpool movies that came out, Deadpool 1 and Deadpool 2, I'd always heard that the original Deadpool movie that came out in 2016, I think, right?
Something like
2016 was they spent $1 million to do the proof of concept, which was him sitting on the edge of the interstate, and
did it like mocap with this was all CG.
And so, and that was the proof of concept to do it. And then, of course, that makes it into the movie. Those movies are very funny. They break the fourth wall. It's unlike anything we had seen in a superhero movie to that point. And it allowed Ryan Reynolds to correct the mistakes of the past. Here's what you have to understand. This movie has been in the works since, which is the first Blade that Ryan Reynolds was in as Wade Wilson?
That was the third one. He wasn't Wade Wilson, though. He was playing a different character.
Oh, I thought he was in there as Wade Wilson. Okay, so it's different Wade Wilson?
It's not Wade Wilson. It's a completely different character. Something Church or something. He's another, I think, like vampire hunter of some kind.
Oh, boy.
Him and Jessica Biel.
Jessica Biel
are the two who team up with Blade, and that was Blade 3, and that was the one where notoriously he had apparently become Wesley Snipes had become really temperamental on set, didn't like the director, difficult to work with, stayed in his trailer all the time. And there's a shot in the movie where Blade is laying on a table and his eyes open, and the relationship between Snipes and the director had broken down so much that Snipes refused to open his eyes at the direction. And so they did it with CG later on, and it's real bad looking.
It's very dead.
It's very shit. And then Wesley Snipes kind of went insane and was off the grid for a while. But anyways,
until now,
I will say, so this I had messaged Greg Carlson after I saw it, and we were talking a little bit about it, and we were talking about what we liked and what didn't work for us, and he referred to his son Forrest, who's 16 now, and who just loved it, front to back, and he said it's really aimed at his target demo, and I was like, yeah, you're right, but the more I've thought about it, sure, that target demo is going to have a lot to enjoy, but the movie's actually crafted for our target demo.
I agree.
Our generation specifically.
Yes. The ones who had to deal with the awkwardness of the beginning of the MCU.
Right. And also who graduated high school in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very much for people who graduated between basically after September 11th. That's basically what it is, because that's when the first Spider-Man came out, and there's the lore of how they had to, they removed the teaser because it had the Twin Towers in it, and X-Men was coming out, and that was a wild time, and that was also the birth of movies being talked about on the internet. Really, that's when leaks Lord of the Rings was coming out, so there were I forget the different websites that are now defunct. Anacool News was a huge one. The message boards there were massive.
There was a huge amount of people who had to meet in hotel lobbies to discuss Babe, A Pig in the City. And they said, if only there was a way we could do this without having to be physically in the same spot. And then places like Ain't It Cool News sparked off, moviepoopshoot.com.
So yes, that is why when I got here and I told you today, for some reason, I've been watching the intro to Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back over and over again for nostalgia. It's because yesterday I saw Deadpool and Wolverine, and it's bringing me back to this time, because that movie is a perfect send up of that culture, where it's just, teenagers and losers just talking shit on the internet, and how at that time it was really just about, this movie sucks, that movie sucks, this actor is shit.
Yeah.
Now it's something totally different. But what a time where that's all it was message boards. That was pre-Facebook, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was pre-MySpace.
Uh-huh.
That's where shit was going down, son.
It's weird, you were Wizard Cloak 56 had space in your brain because somehow they knew stuff that was going to come up. Be like, was their uncle a studio head? Like, how did this
People were
happen?
In chat rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Chat rooms.
Yeah.
Chat rooms. You had dial-up modems still.
This is still in a time when the San Diego Comic-Con was a place that people congregated, but it wasn't as corporatized. Right. It wasn't used. It honestly was what it was intended for, which was nerds getting together to talk about nerd things.
And Wolverine, or Deadpool and Wolverine, lets you know right away that this is a movie aimed at our generation, because the opening scene where he's fighting the TVA with the skeleton of Logan,
which is honestly
2
brilliant.
instincts, bye. I was losing my fucking shit at the back of the theater, to the point that I felt like I was getting looks from other people. Like, it was so silly and stupid and absurd and juvenile. And if me in high school had seen that, his mind would have been fucking blown.
Yeah.
And watching, and I'm assuming it's a body double doing the dancing, because the dancing is right.
So good.
But it could be Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
I would love to know. So the opening scene, I was hooked. I was like, awesome. This is fun. And then we can get into the rest of it as it goes.
I also love when people mention the place where I live. And so,
my God.
downtown North Dakota. The very first dialogue in this movie includes that's why I'm here in beautiful downtown North Dakota. My theater did, yeah, woo, which was great.
We get really pumped in this area when we get mentioned on TV.
Especially when it's not about movies. How crummy we are.
Well,
right?
That kind of was.
I mean, yeah. Also, clearly not. There's mountains in the background and all sorts of stuff. Okay, so this movie this has been the lead up, essentially. So they make Deadpool, they make Deadpool 2, and in both of those, they reference Wolverine over and over and over again, Hugh Jackman over and over and over again, about this possibility of the two of them having a movie together. And for a long time, it didn't look like it was going to happen. I mean, there's rights that were a huge part of this. In R rating is something that Disney, has never really wanted to do with some of their films. whether or not Hugh Jackman even has it anymore, because that dude is in his 60s now, right?
Jesus.
Right?
That's
which is amazing because
powerful
he's
CG then,
he's
too.
ripped. He's ripped in it.
which and younger looking than 60.
Yeah.
There's definitely some human growth hormone going on.
I also think like he's just a talented guy, like, right? I think he probably keeps himself pretty fit and doing Broadway shows take a lot out of you, you know.
Song and dance.
One of my favorite stories is, so they really wanted to make sure that Hugh Jackman, because they've had this fake feud that's gone on too, which has been a lot of fun. But Ryan Reynolds told a story about how Hugh Jackman was coming over to his house to work on some stuff. And because Ryan Reynolds likes to work on things at his home so that he can be near his family, which I think is awesome. Good for him, right? So he walks to the front door and he can hear the Greatest Showman soundtrack blaring from like their living room because his kids love the Greatest Showman. And he goes in and there's Hugh Jackman doing it live. He's singing along with it, but he's doing like the dance, like, this is the greatest show. And Ryan Reynolds goes like, and I realized it was at that point, he goes like, I will never be Hugh Jackman. Which is just great.
No one ever will be.
So this movie, it's a lead up. I like the other two Deadpools. In fact, I watched them both this week leading up to it. I wish I had watched Logan though again, like as just a little. I remember everything from it. That's
some
important.
of my criticisms of Logan are going to come into my criticisms of this movie too.
So
my loving criticisms.
Let's just get into it. This is a movie that's we knew that there were going to be cameos galore. We knew that it was going to reference MCU stuff all over. I mean, they had given away some things in the teaser, like giant Ant-Man's skull underneath his suit. There were a lot of things included in that trailer, but I did not see so much of that coming. And this is the thing. Again, we said this is spoiler heavy. Don't go to IMDb before you see this movie.
Right.
Just go and try and enjoy it like as purely as you can.
Right.
So turn off this podcast, go listen to it, go watch it, and then come back.
Late,
It also, this may be the movie that brings cinemas back to where they need to be, because I saw that the sellout showings are crazy. And this is after a week where Twisters came out, and Twisters was selling out screenings left, right, up, and down.
Well, you can always say hindsight's 2020, but I think on this one, foresight was 2020 a few years ago. You have to imagine. I have to imagine that when Disney bought the Fox catalog, they bought Fox Entertainment, right? Is that what they did? And so just absorbed it basically.
Yeah.
That nothing made more sense than a third Deadpool with Wolverine in it.
I mean,
for a number of reasons. And yeah, I know that it took a long time to be a done deal, and a lot of things happened after that sweetened the deal and made it even better. But like you said, there was only advantage in two humongous movie stars with characters that are probably two of the most popular movie superhero characters in action right now, or in the past 20 years, basically, on some level. The marketing juggernaut that is Ryan Reynolds and the ability to cross promote in a way that the fans love and is really, so I mean, we saw Deadpool and Wolverine selling frozen pizzas, selling Heineken, selling deodorant. I mean, you name it. And the actual Wolverine and Deadpool in those things, right? Massive marketing appeal, including as well that just because Disney hadn't really made R-rated stuff yet, I had thought that they were always just kind of looking for what is the logical on-ramp to being able to do that. And this provided that for them, right? Because there's money to be made in R-rated movies.
I think, well, and like, but that proof isn't until recently, right? Like R-rated movies used to be the thing where you made it because you wanted your Academy Award, or, Eddie Murphy was going to be in it. And yes, they were successful, but they were not as bankable as they were before.
You would take a financial hit.
You certainly could. And, Logan proves that people wanted to come out to that. That movie was super successful with its R rating. Things like The Hangover, proving comedies. And then the Deadpool franchise, heavy R ratings, getting into it. I think that Disney buying Fox was like a wedding gift, like to their bride of Kevin Feige. I think that
that is such a good way to put it.
Right. They're like, listen, we know that your playground isn't complete. And so we bought you this.
When they tell Ike Perlmutter, you know what, sit down. We're going to listen to this Kevin kid. Right. That's when you know who's powerful and who isn't.
Right. And quite frankly, there have been very few missteps under his guys at this studio. When you look at the total pantheon of what they've been able to do.
Yeah, you can't compare it to anything else.
Right. I mean,
nothing else exists like that.
This is like, honestly, like when the Warner Brothers were running Warner Brothers, you know, this is like the Richard Zanuck of the you know, of that era. He's an impresario of Hollywood. Nobody has done what he's done in decades. You know, you could say the closest maybe is like a Spielberg, but you know, he's jumping around from place to place, and it's
the closest thing to like the classic Hollywood studio system.
It really is. It truly, truly is. And so I think that he wanted this thing to happen, and it took him a little bit of convincing, but now that it has, we've got a movie out there. I went to it on opening night. So I went to it 6:00 opening night on Thursday. And when I got there, Tristan, the first thing he says, he goes like, I'm sorry, we're out of popcorn buckets. And I was like, that is awesome. That means that enough fans have come to this by 6:00. There's maybe only like 3 other screenings before that, but they've purchased them out of a collector's item, right? And I think that that's a huge part of this too, is the number of people who come out for that level of fandom and want to get into it. So, okay, so let's break down the movie itself, right? So tell me what you thought about Deadpool and Wolverine.
So I had a fun time watching it. There were a lot of laughs. I enjoyed the nostalgia hits, of which there are many. And I was also surprised that I got bored a couple of times. And I was like, this is weird. I shouldn't be bored at this. Like on paper, this would entertain me from start to finish. And so I'm still figuring out exactly why did I feel that way? What is it about it? The things that I really liked about it is just that we did get to see a bunch of things that we never thought we would, including Wolverine in full costume,
including the cowl,
a lot of fun action sequences, really, really good jokes. And Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, you can just always watch that guy, right? He's always fun. Now, at the same time, I got the same level of feeling of fatigue that I got watching Thor: Love and Thunder, where because there's a gag every 5 seconds, I kind of started to like wilt a little bit. Like they stopped having as much impact as I was hoping they would have. And other pieces of the storytelling, I felt like that was a missed opportunity to do something more impactful with it. Like why Wolverine was so ashamed. Why he was the worst Wolverine. And it's like, yeah, okay, he wasn't there to help his friends, not knowing they were being attacked because he was too drunk somewhere.
Right.
But that's really the best. And we just find out about it from him telling us in a scene, in a sequence in his head.
For a movie that was willing to go so far in some of those, things like to not show James Marsden being torn apart by these humans who hate mutants or something like that. I felt like we were being kind of cheapened.
Right. And there was a real opportunity, I think, to not just continue the Deadpool sort of legacy and style, but to evolve it a bit. Where, his relationship falling apart and that motivating him and feeling like he's nothing or worthless. I think you could have made a more interesting movie exploring both those things, spending more time with these two guys exploring those things. Here's the thing that doesn't work for me, and not as a prude or anything, but merely as a storyteller. It doesn't have an effect when I see a character just constantly drinking their sorrows away and saying fuck every 5 seconds. That saying fuck a bunch of times doesn't make it adult, and having them just in their cups all the time doesn't make them odd. And those are the laziest things to go to when you're like a teenager making a movie. I remember when I was a teenager making a movie, and I went straight. It was right to just drugs and saying saying every naughty word you can constantly. The thing that's fun about those naughty words is when they surprise you, when they kind of come out of nowhere. When it's a constant, it just loses its efficacy, and then the lines become dull. Wolverine says fuck almost every piece of dialogue he has because he's angry, because he's disaffected. There are more interesting ways to show us that and to tell us that.
For example, in Days of Futures Past, okay, when they're going through the timeline. No, it's not Days of. No, it's First Class when they're looking for all the mutants who are going to join it.
Yes.
And
go fuck yourself.
Go fuck yourselves. Right. That was impactful.
Solid example. That's a perfect example. This is the same. I had this exact same criticism for Logan because the very first word in the movie is fuck. And they did that intentionally to go, oh, we're not in Kansas anymore. And the moment I heard it, I went, ooh, you said fuck. And what is Logan? He's despondent. He's saying fuck every 5 seconds. He's drinking all the time. He can't get it up with his claws. It's the same thing. And it's boring. It's uninteresting to me. There's so many. It's a movie that has no business being boring. And it's not boring front to back. But as I kind of go, man, what's going on? There are a lot of missed opportunities there. I think another movie that they should have drawn some more inspiration from, would have been Captain America: Civil War, right? Because you've got these two massive leads who are the reason people are there, and you have a villain, but the villain is really kind of subtle and really gets at them in a way that you didn't see coming, and
he's able to turn them against each other,
and doesn't outshine them in any specific way. Cassandra Nova is an interesting character in general, and there's a lot that you could have done to plumb the depths of that character, but you never really get there. She's more or less just a Deus Ex, just a reason to be there, a thing for them to have to fight against. And all of the moments of exposition, which are clunky and called out as clunky in the writing, calling out the clunky exposition doesn't necessarily forgive the clunky exposition, which superhero movies are very bad at doing, admittedly. But the exposition of, oh, this is what's about to happen with the Time Ripper and this is what you have to do to destroy it was just so absolutely leaden. It made me not give a shit about the third act until I thought, oh, this is the swan song. This is the true swan song for these two guys and these characters. That's interesting. They're going to go, hey, our characters are dying and riding off into the sunset for this new generation of stuff because we're going into the era of mutants in the MCU. Well, but you can't kill someone off if they're your cash cow and if there's opportunity to make crazy money in the future. And so it felt the same, the ending of it, where I won't give the specifics of it so we can talk more in depth about all these things. I'm giving my overview. But it had the same effect to me as C-3PO in The Rise of Skywalker, where it would have been so interesting for him to never have regained any of his memories and for that to be a truly selfless act, essentially a suicide, where he has to erase his memories for that. But then they totally take away the significance of that act by just restoring him to the backup from the day before. So he really only loses, not even that, a few minutes prior to it, right? And so it completely takes what could be a really interesting piece of storytelling, right? Chewbacca's on a spaceship that explodes. Oh my God, he's dead. No, he's not. He's alive the very next scene. Oh, okay. That has we didn't give a shit then. We should never have cared. So things like that happen in this movie too. I've talked a lot. I'm going to throw it across to you, but that's my nutshell. I enjoyed the movie. I'd probably give it a C+ as a movie. I would definitely recommend seeing it. I'm definitely going to watch it again. I feel like there's a better movie inside of there, and give us a really long director's cut or something. Show us what you couldn't make room for, because that being my final criticism is there's so much packed into the movie and so much wonderful stuff packed into the movie. They had to cut a lot of not just scenes entirely, but pacing. They had to cut a lot of things to get this all shoved in. What I wouldn't give for maybe a more thoughtfully paced, slightly slower, maybe broken up into two pieces movie that I could really take and digest, because it never gives you enough time to get that deep into it. It's always surface level.
I'm going to comment on this right at the beginning. I am done with Hollywood making 2 movies out of a single story.
Fair enough.
Right?
Fair enough.
Like, it just, a sequel is one thing.
Sure.
But like telling me the story of The Hobbit in 3 different movies is ridiculous.
Agreed.
Okay. So here's what, watching Deadpool 1 and 2 leading into this, there was a narrative that they missed out on this completely, which is him talking about like, this is a love story. And it, this is a movie. This movie's about a love story. He talks about that in the first one. He goes, and the second one, he goes, this is a family film. Believe it or not, this is a family film, a movie about family. He doesn't do that in this one. Mm-hmm. So in a weird way, I feel like they got a little lazy by not following their own formula, but then saying we're still beholden to the formula.
Right.
So, for example, the movie starting out at a scene that is actually 20 minutes into the actual film was, something they did in Deadpool 1, Deadpool 2, mm-hmm. Deadpool 3, but they didn't follow through on that, like what this movie is about. I think, if anything, what this movie lacked was, why does he care about these people so much? He's in a dead end job. He goes to the birthday party, and he's there and making, conversation, everything like that. But so he's going through all of this for 9 people. Mm. He has no loss involved in that at all. Mm. Like, why not tell us that, like let's Back to the Future, right? Let's watch Colossus disappear in front of him. Right. Like he needs something that has some depth to it. In the first movie, he's given a terminal cancer. Right. Yep. And so he's going to lose the love of his life. In the second one, they kill the love of his life. Yep. And in this one, other than the fact of like they're going to disappear at some point, it doesn't matter.
She thinks he's a weenie.
Right. I needed to see that. I needed to see more of how Deadpool's life has gone down the shitter, mm-hmm. right? And how he gave up the superhero stuff. They don't really explain why, like for her safety, mm-hmm. for this, but yet he's still hanging out with the X-Men,
right?
That kind of piece of it. I think it would have been better if it had opened with the scene of him trying to get into the Avengers. I think that's an opening scene that pulls you in, that shows you it's not going to work out.
And there's a couple of things that's really interesting about that scene too, because that scene takes place in the Fox Marvel universe. Yeah. Right. Uh-huh. So Disney's basically saying, there's a version of the Avengers there, but who also exists in that universe is Jon Favreau as Happy Hogan, or as Happy Hogan with Daredevil. And that would have been a lot of fun if instead he was visiting with a lawyer. Right. And not maybe not trying to get into the Avengers or something else beyond that. I don't know. I think we can. He goes on this trip, and we get these really fun flashbacks to not flashbacks. He's time skipping. He's timeline skipping.
Yep.
To find different Wolverines, which is fun. And they were all examples from the comics, right? So Wolverine's actual height. Wolverine in his sort of classic brown costume, which is my favorite costume, Greg Carlson's favorite costume. The second costume he sort of had after he got rid of the yellow and black and blue for a little bit. Patch, where he's in Madripoor. Age of Apocalypse Wolverine, where he's missing his left hand. I loved seeing that. I forget the storyline where he's sort of crucified on the X with all the skulls, but that's a famous cover that he's on. So I was digging all of that stuff. And then I thought, wow, how are they going to make all this sort of tie in some way? But then I realized after we left was like, oh, shoot. This isn't a movie where I get to see him as Patch for a bit. Mm-hmm. This isn't a movie where I get to see him as Age of Apocalypse for a bit. And I think, would that not have been more fun if the whole goal of the movie was there is a anchor Wolverine out there somewhere. We don't know which one it is, but we got to find who it is. And so he's going, and it's just him and various Wolverines throughout. Right. And we're just spending time doing that. That would have been so fucking fun. And then flesh out the Fox universe or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because I can't remember who released Blade. Was that New Line Cinema?
Yep.
So they're kind of spread out, and obviously the Channing Tatum Gambit never actually happened. But make that a shared universe, and just say, yeah, this isn't it's. That would have been so much more fun. How much fun would it have been for them to have gone into a Blade movie?
Right. Bingo. Exactly. Right. This is going to be a tough one for the MCU to hear, but you gotta give up on the TVA. It is the most boring part, and it is in all honesty, it is needlessly complicated for what they're doing. So our main villain of the TVA, I can't remember that actor's name, but he's in Succession.
Yeah,
I really like him a lot, and like I like him in this role. But you know what they didn't give him? They didn't give him the exposition scene of where he's being assigned to this thing as essentially the 1,000-year babysitter until the timeline decays, and showing that he doesn't want to be in middle management anymore, right? Like that's what's keeping him from achieving his life goal of whatever it is. You just get that he wants to get rid of this thing so it's done and easy. You know, he keeps calling it like a mercy kill, but there's still several thousand years. It also bothers me too about how they what do they call the prime, the person who's like the person,
the anchor being.
The anchor being.
Yeah.
So it also bothered me. I'm like, well, if Deadpool's going to remove other Wolverines, what's to say that they aren't the anchor being of these other timelines? So he's just dooming that world to it.
I mean, admittedly, superhero logic is always pretty fuzzy, and Hollywood logic is even fuzzier.
Yes, very much so.
That's probably in the area of where they would go. There's just some explanation off screen that we're not even going to wave a hand at. But that guy, that was the opportunity. Paradox was the character's name. That could have been the Baron von Strucker, right? Of Civil War, where in that we knew he was the bad guy, but in this one, it really could have been more of a slow rollout.
It's also an opportunity to make you have a villain that you identify with, right? Like what he's saying here, he goes, this universe is already dead.
Right.
It's terminally ill.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make space and like explain about how like when one timeline is destroyed, other timelines get stronger. Right. And so your friends and other timelines become stronger. And like, what do you really, give him that thing of like, what do you have to live for here?
Right.
And, show him a video of like, Yukio and Teenage Negasonic Warhead saying like, do we really have to go to this thing? Like we do. Like he's had a tough year. But he like, well, his pathetic. Show them that they don't even really care about him as much. Yeah. So you get the feeling that like, okay, maybe he will take on this thing to go to another universe and Deadpool it up there.
They could have made basically a road trip movie with Deadpool and Wolverine going through the multiverse. And imagine, so there's that scene in sort of the middle of the movie. It's a fun scene. They're just fighting inside of a car. And I love the idea that like we're going to have a fight scene. The whole thing takes place inside of a car between these two. That's fun. Imagine if that fight scene had taken place across a bunch of realities instead. Imagine Wolverine and Deadpool are actually both competing for the same goal. There's some MacGuffin they're trying to reach, which will save their reality. So they're competing with each other over it, and maybe they're both fighting over a time skipper device of some kind.
Right. Essentially, they're both trying. It's a race against time for each of them to get to the Temple of Doom, right? And so that because whichever one gets there first is going to get to keep this thing to save their universe, but they can't save both.
Right. And so at one point, one of them uses the thing, and they both end up going into the opening club scene in Blade where he's killing all the vampires in the red, and they have a fight scene there. And then they skip again and they go to a different previous Marvel movie, right? And they kind of skip through, and you get just these nods to those things. But you also get this gigantic, amazing set piece, basically player on player fight, just like the fighting games like Street Fighter versus X-Men. You could have had Wolverine do Berserker Barrage. At that point, you could have done a lot of things that would have been fan service, but would have also been a really interesting way to explore the multiverse. I think, the movie could have been, and it kind of is, but it could have been a Deadpool movie that is really just a celebration of the legacy of Wolverine as a character. In the same way, Batman Brave and the Bold does that for Batman, where they're like, we're going to make a show where we're just exploring all things that are Batman, the many flavors of Batman. And we got a piece of that with Wolverine in this. He's one of the most popular superhero characters of all time. But they could have leaned into that even farther, and we wouldn't need to have had mopey emo Logan. We've seen enough of that. We wouldn't need to have had a giant mega villain. That could have been more interesting. I thought the power where she's reaching her hand into their head, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
That she needs physical contact to be able to read your mind and do things like that. But there were fun moments, but so much missed opportunity.
The first time you watch Deadpool and Wolverine, it's too much stimulus. So it's like a baby watching a Chuck E. Cheese presentation, to the point of where when we were driving home, it was like, did you notice this? Did you see this? Did you catch that? And so you almost need a second viewing no matter what, especially if you're anyone who has an affinity for these films, right, to be able to take in everything that they are trying to show you.
Yep. I also, though, think, based off of something that Kevin Feige said in the press, that this movie is telling us exactly what we're going to be seeing over the next 4 to 8 years, which is that this movie is this has planted the seeds for Secret Wars. And which is more than likely the Russo brothers directing again, since they're in negotiations for it, and they would be the obvious choice. And one reason why I say that, as far as this is setting the ground for that, Feige said in an interview, when someone asked him, like, how impactful is this movie towards the future of the MCU? And he said, well, if Endgame was a 10 and Infinity War was a 9, this is an 8, right? So it's very, very impactful for the future of it. At the end of this movie, the Fox timeline still exists.
Yep.
It's not gone. Deadpool and Wolverine are both in that. They're not in the MCU right now. Technically, according to the storyline, they're not in the prime timeline, quote unquote, right? So there is, and they have their own versions of these characters in their timeline. So that sets the stage for introducing a new Wolverine at some point, which they're going to do. But it also sets the stage for Secret Wars, which is a multiverse story where all these different realities come together into Battle World. And they have to, I think they battle the Beyonder, I think. And so that then means that a lot of these characters that exist in that world, they're being propped up to be some sort of part of that future story, which is why we still have Wolverine and Deadpool in a universe that is not the MCU.
Here is something that I think is outside of all of these things that you go like, ooh, even Hollywood can be so wrong sometimes. They knew that they were releasing this movie mid-July in 2024. Okay. That was their goal for when they started shooting this. They knew that their biggest summer competition was going to be Furiosa, a Mad Max story. And so they include a huge amount of parody of it. And that movie was a nothing burger. Like, it didn't touch anybody. In fact, more people are going to see this movie on opening weekend than Furiosa got during its entire run. And so I think that just goes to show you like how they were like, okay, so this is our biggest competition, so we'll find something to poke fun at it while they're in the void. Yeah. And it turns out that they didn't even need it.
Yeah, it's basically the second act of the movie is a Mad Max parody. Mm-hmm. That's the whole thing.
This movie has a lot of forceful misdirection that I think is pretty funny and like obviously self-referential in so many ways. I 100% fell for the Chris Evans cameo.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, this is awesome. Like, I can't believe that they got this. But I was thinking, like, Sean Levy directed Free Guy, right, which included a Captain America, cameo that was a big deal at that point. Yeah. And so, like, of course they can make this thing happen.
The reference of, do you know what he was doing to our budget?
Yeah.
was pretty killer. And also the post-credit sequence where it turns out he did say literally every one of those things.
So interesting. Jill leaned to me and she goes, what do you think the post-credit scene is going to be when they first started rolling the credits? And I said, well, I don't know. And she goes, it's got to be, why is Thor crying?
Oh, yeah.
And that feels,
another setup for Secret Wars.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Like, so we have this thing that we get no payoff for. So you have to think, there's got to be something there later on. Let's talk about this movie moves from cameo setup to cameo setup to cameo setup, right? Like that becomes a big thing with it. The first one being Chris Evans, and the beginning of the sort of fourth tier baddies and stuff like that. I love the fact that they get Ray Park back to play Toad.
It was Ray Park?
It was Ray Park. Yeah, okay. It was Ray Park.
It was not Vinnie Jones for Juggernaut.
It was not, but they made a specific comment about that, about how like, oh, a Juggernaut we haven't seen yet.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that was funny because they also don't use the Juggernaut, the CG Juggernaut from the actual Deadpool universe, right? So, which I thought was interesting. I was waiting for one of them to be animated at one point.
Yeah, I
thought that maybe there's a world where that happens.
And I was waiting for that in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and I was waiting for that in Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And like Multiverse of Madness is the first thing where Marvel decides, listen, we are going to feed the cameo ego out there. We are going to give you so much that you can't handle it. And then they're like, but with Deadpool, we're going to completely change it. I love the fact that this movie became a love letter to the Marvel movies that have some of the lowest scores on Rotten Tomatoes, but saying like, there's still a world. The Ben Affleck dig that Jennifer Garner handles is brilliant. I mean, that's the thing is, it used to be that comic book movies were for nerds, male nerds, right? But this deals deep enough into, if you are someone who reads Us Weekly every single week, like there's some stuff here for you too.
Yeah. The Gambit stuff ruled.
It was so
I
good.
loved every moment of Gambit, including who is your dialect coach?
Yeah. Are the minions helping you out? And
the most comic accurate Gambit you're ever going to get.
And you know what? To me, you get what everyone essentially like said over and over about this, which is like, Gambit is this Creole character that do we really need it? And Channing Tatum wants to play him so bad, but is Channing Tatum the right guy? And then you finally get it and you're like, oh, it's a good thing we don't have a whole movie of this, right? I couldn't tell if the Blob was the same guy who played him in Wolverine.
I don't think it's the same guy. Is the guy in the striped shirt from Punisher?
Yeah.
The Tom Jane Punisher?
Yeah.
Okay. I would have loved to have seen Tom Jane Punisher. I would have loved to have seen Nick Cage Ghost Rider.
I actually would have loved to have seen several Punishers. Like the one from the TV show. Here's the thing. I thought because they were including the TVA in this, we might have seen more of the TV stuff, like more of the Disney Plus stuff kind of come out here, like, give a show throwaway to She-Hulk or something like that.
Right.
All in all, I give it a higher score. I give it a B, not a B minus, not a B plus, solid B. Just because I respect the contract negotiations that had to take place to make this even happen.
True.
Because why would Jennifer Garner want to come back as Elektra? There's nothing in there for her.
Yep.
There's nothing, like she had to take her licks. It virtually ruined her career for 5 years. And so for her to do this again, like you said, Wesley Snipes, and like his line of like, "There's only one blade. There'll ever only be one blade."
That ruled.
That
was killer.
Like convincing them to say these things too. Like,
I think the biggest piece of that, the way that worked out, was because it was Ryan Reynolds.
It must have
been. He
been.
has relationships with all these people and goes and pitches them directly, because there's a story that came out that he and Hugh Jackman met with Madonna, like in person over dinner, to ask if they could use like
a prayer,
during that last scene,
which the orchestral version with that choir was just ruled. That last scene, just in general, where they're fighting in that kind of like pan shot.
Yeah,
I like it. It a lot.
Yeah, but I loved seeing him with the cowl on, and at the same time, one of the reasons why I didn't like the Wolverine X-Men Origins movie is they treated every single thing like an R2-D2 moment where, the crowd's going to applaud at this point. And it's like, I would have preferred he just was using the cowl on and off throughout the movie. And I probably would have left the white out eyes with Deadpool so we could see Hugh Jackman's expressions a bit more. But it was still fun to see it. But even nitpicky me is like, they got rid of the sleeves, but they also got rid of the shoulder pads. Those are always there, right? At one point, I just want to go, at what point can you just give us exactly what we want? and then fuck around with everything else, right? The first X-Men movie where they're like, oh, that's dumb. It should at least be black leather, right?
Yeah.
But and then there's callback lines like Scott always wanted me to wear the suit, which is making fun of the line that Scott says in the first X-Men, what do you want, yellow spandex, right? So there are all those little callbacks that are fun, but man, they could have done a lot more with that. I would have taken a whole movie of the team up that they made in the middle to fight Cassandra Nova's people, right? I would have loved to have seen a whole movie where it's Deadpool, Wolverine, X-23, Elektra, Gambit, and Blade. What a great team.
So that part of is the road trip movie, right?
Yeah.
It's the reason why we like the first Avengers so much is because the first half of that movie is getting the team together.
Right.
And so let them get the shittiest team together. You know, like that's part of, I think it's the shittiest team of superheroes in the void versus the shittiest villains that are in there. And like clearly there was some stuff. I didn't see Olivia Munn in there, but I saw Psylocke kind of like purple. I
couldn't tell if
like
it was her
rope.
or not.
And so to me, I'm like, well, there's clearly stuff where they couldn't maybe get someone, but they're like, you know who it is by what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's I like the movie. I'm gonna go see it again this weekend, and I had to buy my tickets in advance because holy moly, this thing is selling out everywhere. Now, one criticism is I was planning on flying to Chicago this weekend on a whim because I want to see Twisters in 4DX. Have you seen the footage of that?
4DX, what the fuck is that?
4DX is a theater experience. Regal Cinemas have them where the seats move, but then they also have like a wind generator and like water and stuff like that. So watching people watch Twister in 4DX, you can watch it on TikTok. Like they're sitting there and their popcorn is shooting out of their hand, like out of the bucket. It looks like it is like so intense, and they're like, it feels like you're inside the tornado, and people are walking out and they are soaking wet. There's a button that says water on, water off on your chair so you can have it.
Wait, how do they block it? What if the person next to you says water on, you say water off, then they say water on?
So like these seats are, it's almost like you're in a pod kind of thing.
Okay.
So like maybe there's a little bit of mist that hits you, but like
interesting.
Yeah,
I hadn't even heard of this.
Neither had I. 4DX, and they're saying like, and it's an IMAX experience, so it's 4DX, and there are other ones that have sort of similar, like maybe some motion seats and things like that. But it looks like Twisters was literally built for this, and I had a lot of fun at Twisters. I mean, I actually think that it's a really decent movie, and Glenn Powell, you got to get him into the MCU. He's so charming, so great. Also, this is my last thought. We have to start making MCU movies where we don't kill the villain every single time, because we've come so accustomed to that like what's the point? Like if Cassandra had just been sent back to the void, you know, without her sling ring, like I want to know that she's amassing, you know, like an army in, you know, essentially show me the opposite side of Endgame, right? Show me, instead of all these heroes getting together to fight at one point, show me all these villains getting together to fight who've been thrown away and tossed away.
It also tells us that a sling ring can get you across timelines.
Yeah, I also had questions about that too. That one kind of that felt a little unsettling to me because I'm like, we didn't see Strange doing that.
It might. There's probably an explanation of from there you can go to a timeline, but you can't go from timeline to timeline. Maybe in the wasteland, or if you are someone with Cassandra Nova's power, you can do it.
Nice pool. Also, the hardest I laughed during this whole thing is when he goes, I can break the fourth wall too. The proposal. That one.
That killed me. That absolutely killed me.
It like I laughed wholeheartedly for a long time during that. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. I think that Peggy the Ugly Dog is really the standout star from this movie.